Hi guys, welcome to the first day of EDS Sanata Dharma beginner class. Let me introduce myself. My name is Natasha Mariana and I'm delighted to welcome you guys to this webinar class presented by EDS Sanata Dharma. So it's a pleasure for me to be the master of ceremony of this event. Considering this event is held virtually, you may share your expression and excitement by using the comment section or emojis provided by Zoom because I believe that there should be not a limitation for us to have fun and learn in this event, even though we can only see each other through our screen. The Sanata Dharma beginner class will be held for today, and it will consist of sessions that will be delivered by the excellent and experienced speakers that will enhance your knowledge about English debating. Specifically, there will be two sessions today that will be filled by Jen Taruno and Astri Agustina. So ladies and gentlemen, before we move further, first of all, we will hear some welcome words from EDS Sanata Dharma advisor, Ma'am Epata Pujiastuti SSMA, and EDS President Natasha Mariana. But before that, I will give some quick rundown for this webinar. So firstly, there will be the introduction of our speakers. Then we will have, and then we will directly jump to our main event, which is the classes and also Q&A for each session. And then you can directly type your question in the chat room. But yeah, keep in mind that we can cut the question if it's already 17:30 waktu Indonesia Barat. And lastly, we will close the first day of this event. So without any further ado, let's start our event by hearing the opening speech by our advisor, Ma'am Eva. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, hi, for all the participants, if you have no problem with the, or if you don't have any problem with the internet connection, maybe you can turn on your camera and say hi to another participants, and also for the speakers. That will be very fun, yeah, if we can turn on our camera. Okay, so good afternoon to all participants, speakers, and this webinar committee. Yes, that will be very good, yeah, if we can turn on the camera and like say hi and show our facial expression, yeah, all right. Okay, so I'm very happy can meet all of you in this virtual room. I hope all of you are in a good and healthy condition. It is such a big opportunity for EDS Sanata Dharma to hold a webinar, especially for beginner, yeah. There are many questions, of course, about how to start debating, how to be a good judge, how to make a good strategy in debate. But sometimes or often we do not know to whom we should ask. That's why today's webinar will answer all of your questions, yeah. Many students have passion and interest in debate, but many of them also do not know how to start. That's why today's webinar is aimed to answer all of these questions. Let's answer all of the confusion and curiosity in debating. Let's develop our skills in speaking, reasoning, and critical thinking. I do hope that this webinar will be beneficial for all of the participants here, since we have a very competent speakers with us. And I'm sure that they are very happy to share their knowledge and experience in debate. Thank you so much for the speakers also. And it's also a great chance to meet a passionate debaters from many cities in Indonesia, such as from Sumatera Utara, we have Universitas Sumatera Utara, and then Universitas Lambung Mangkurat, Universitas Halu Oleo, and many other university that I cannot mention one by one. And also a good news is that the participant not only from university students, but also senior high school, even the teacher. Thank you so much. I hope all of you will enjoy this today's webinar and get a lot of insight from the speaker. Thank you so much. I think that's all what I can, my welcoming speech here. I hope you enjoy and have fun in this webinar. Thank you so much, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Eva, for the amazing opening speech. Now giving the floor to our President Natasha. I give you the floor to myself. Hi guys. As the President and the representative of EDS Sanata Dharma, the reason why we make this webinar series is because we want to give back to the Indonesian community and also to help the debate proliferation across Indonesia. That's why we try our best to give you the best speakers who have milestone achievements in Indonesia debating circuit, and also it's actually beyond our expectation to have the webinar participants from all across Indonesia, from Sumatra, Sulawesi, Kalimantan, and others. So I want to express my deepest gratitude toward the English Letters Department of Sanata Dharma University, our advisor, Ma'am Eva, and also our amazing speakers and our participants, because we couldn't make it this far without all of you. And lastly, I hope you guys can enjoy and learn from this webinar as much as we. All right. So I think that now before we start the class, I would like to introduce our speaker for this session, Jennifer. So oh yeah. All right. So yeah, if you guys are quite active in the Indonesian debating circuit, I believe you guys know the little you know, because Jen is one of the most generous debater I've ever known, but also the youngest with outstanding achievements of debating in both in international and national competition. So who's actually Jen? Jen is the ESL finalist of 4th Dogsbridge Online Debate Open, Best Speaker of EEC in Action 2021, and the representative of Team Indonesia in World School Debate Championship 2021. Jen also managed to judge several national and international debate competitions, such as Sydney AWDC Quarterfinal Judge 2021, Founders Trophy 2021 Final Chair and Best Judge, and lastly, NOPED Final Judge 2021. So that's all to sum up who's actually Jen in Indonesia debating circuit. Now let's start the first session with Jen Taruno about basic debating for newbies. So I give this screen to Jen.
Hi, just to confirm, and thank you so much for that introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Okay, great. So first of all, just thank you so much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here and to be speaking to like new debaters all across Indonesia, because I myself have only started debating 3 years ago, and I still like really remember my early days of debating. So it's a fun like walk back in the past. Anyways, I think the participant screen sharing is disabled. So could you either enable it, or maybe someone from the committee can share the screen? Yep. Okay, great. We have that on full screen. I think it's more convenient this way for me as well. So thanks for that. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen, and I'll be talking about basic debating for newbies in today's seminar. I expect this to be about 1 hour long, and then the rest will be just time for questions and answers. So yeah, the questions and answers can be things about the seminar. It can also be things like experiences or my stories if you need any of that, because I won't be sharing like those specific stuff in the seminar. But basically, as the seminar goes on, please like write your questions down or think of questions to remember to like ask later, because I prefer this to be an interactive discussion. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Okay, cool. So since this is something for newbies, and this is like the first seminar that we're having on this whole like beginners class series, I think the first question we should ask is, why are you debating right now? And why should you keep on doing it? Because I feel like in general, I feel like it's a really good sport that everyone should join because of all the like critical thinking, open-mindedness that it promotes. But I think people join debating because of either one or both of these reasons. The first reason is to achieve. Maybe you're here because you want to like, earn best speaker awards or medals in the national sphere. Maybe you want to get into the, like the selected team for worlds, either for university or schools, or maybe you want to just like find a scholarship like I did back then. Or you might be the people in the second group, which is here to have fun. So to like, be inside the community, which is full of really, really fun people who can talk about everything, to enjoy the sport in general. I think everyone should view debating as a sport, but whichever it is, both of you will need to be good at it in order for you to be able to achieve that goal. I feel like even if you want to only have fun, you need to be good at it because we have to accept it. Debating is a sport. It's mainly competitive. So if you keep on losing or if you don't improve at all, it might be not rewarding. So what I hope to provide today is for you to be able to find that framework to be good at it. So like for the basics and foundations to be covered, so you know like where to go, like what to improve on when you're starting out in debate in general, because it is a sport that just like every other sport, I feel like winning is very, very fun. And improving is very, very fun and something that everyone deserves to get. Yep, can go to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to discuss is something that is technical, that we're going to always face in debates. When we first face a motion, when we start case building, the first thing that we should do is not to scramble for arguments, not to try and panic or not to like just look for random ideas that you can bring up in the debate. But the first thing is analyzing the burden of proof. And this is something that even like debaters in the national level sometimes forget. And I feel like this is something that's very, very important to be aware of since the time you're new in debate, because it'll give you like a huge head start if you understand like what is the burden of proof, what is the thing that you have to prove in order to win a debate. So I think the easiest way to introduce this concept is by like dividing the types of motions that you can encounter in debate. And there are mainly 5 of these motions, each with a different like burden that you have to prove in order for you to win. The first type of motion is a this house would, or a this house believes that someone should do something kind of motion. It's basically called a policy motion, where you're trying to do something, you're trying to make a proposal to pass either as the government or as a neutral, third party observer that thinks a policy should be passed. So because those policies are usually about certain problems that exist in the status quo, usually what you have to prove in those kinds of debates would be, how do you solve a certain problem? So if you encounter the motion of maybe this house believes that the feminist movement should actively recruit conservative women, maybe that's the motion you encounter, then there must be a certain problem in the status quo that the feminist movement is facing, and you're trying to solve that problem. So if it's trying to actively recruit conservative women, for example, then in case building, you want to find what that problem is that the feminist movement needs to recruit conservative women, and you want to identify how it benefits the feminist movement. So in this case, you would think of the idea of inclusivity, because the feminist movement wants to cater to all women in general, then you have to include conservative women as well, because in the past, maybe it's mostly liberal women who are in the feminist movement, and currently there is an imbalance of liberal and conservative women. So you need to recruit the conservative women to keep the voice balanced, to keep the representation balanced, to make sure that the feminist movement is welcome to everyone, and also making policies that benefit everyone. So if you have that mindset during case building, it's going to direct your case in the right direction. Maybe if you didn't think of this, you would only think that you should actively recruit conservative women because conservative women are suffering and they need help, and actively recruiting conservative women brings that benefits but it's probably not the most important issue in the debate. So this is what I want you to like think of when you face a motion. Don't just like look for benefits or look for things that are obvious, but try to figure out what the motion is trying to demand. And yeah, usually that is like the main argument that would work in a this house would or this house believes that someone should do something motion. The next kind of motion is this house believes that motion. So this is a value judgment motion. An example of this is this house believes that it is no longer morally acceptable to be forgot the wording, but like basically to not participate in like helping climate change, something along those lines. It was a motion in like an argumentum competition a while ago. But basically those kinds of motions aim to have a value judgment. So it only aims to evaluate whether something is true or not, or maybe sometimes there are motions that say this house believes that something does more harm than good, for example, right? And yeah, with these kinds of motions, what you want to do is only to prove the sentence that is already there. So if you are facing such motion, then focus all of your arguments on proving what is already there, and don't look for things like, oh, I'm used to finding like justification arguments or urgency arguments, so I have to look for that every time. No, you have to only focus on the goal that the motion like demands you to bring. And maybe if it's like being like this house believes that it's no longer moral to not participate in helping to solve climate change, then what you evaluate is like the moral considerations of somebody, whether they want to help or not help in climate change. So that's what you want to think of. Or maybe if it's like this house believes that the state is morally illegitimate, then you want to like dissect what is actually the concept of the state and why is it morally illegitimate. So I think the general tip here is just to focus on what the motion demands you to prove, and also define everything very, very carefully so that you make sure you're debating the right thing, because sometimes definitional challenges can be things that are quite tricky in these kinds of motions. But basically focus on just proving what is necessary, what the motion demands you to prove, because these kinds of motions are probably the most simple kinds of motions, and sometimes teams overcomplicate it and bring unnecessary arguments, even though that's not what the motion is about. So yeah, that's like pure THBT motions that don't have a should addition behind it. That's how you do those kinds of debates. The next kind of motion is as X, this house would do something. And if any of you have checked IVET 2022, then there are lots and lots of motions about as somebody, this house would do something. Basically, it's about fulfilling the actor's interest. And whoever X is, what you want to do is try to get in their shoes and try to define their interests first before you start thinking of arguments. So if it is as parents, you would teach your children a certain way of life, for example, then you should never think about the children first, because the main actor in the debate is the parents, and they are the ones that are going to be the anchor of the debate. So the winning team is not the team that proves the most benefits or the most harms in general, but the winning team is the team that proves the most benefits or harms to the actor. So you want to analyze what are their interests, what are their capabilities, and how do they prioritize and like navigate with these priorities and abilities that they have. So that's how you want to do as X motions. You think about who the actor is first, and you think about then the benefits and harms that are going to be most impactful to these actors. And that's how you want to win these kinds of motions. Yeah, so that's about like as X, this house would motions. The next kind of motion is this house regrets, this house celebrates, this house opposes, this house supports. So these kinds of motions are usually about analyzing trends or certain phenomenon that have happened or are happening in the status quo, and why we are better with or without them. Yeah, right. So I kind of read the chat. I think it's okay to just like share the PPT after the sessions. That is cool. Anyways, so with these types of motions, what you want to do is compare the world with this trend and without the trend. And that also automatically means that if you're on the government side of a this House regrets motion, so for example, something like this House regrets the decline of religion and the rise of science, maybe, then you want to analyze the world and what it would look like without that thing. Maybe it's this House regrets the rise of Xi Jinping. You want to analyze what is the world like without Xi Jinping, who would be the alternative leader of the CCP, for example. And this is what teams usually miss. They don't try to construct a world that exists without the trend happening or without the phenomenon happening, what it's going to look like, even though that's going to be the only like positive case that you're going to have in the debate. That's what you have to defend when that trend doesn't exist. And you want to build that counterfactual, it's called counterfactual, basically like the world, the comparative world without that thing in the motion. You want to construct it from the very first speaker so that it's very, very clear what alternative you're defending and why it's better off. Because we have accepted as time goes on that something is only regrettable when the world is worse off without it. So whatever trend it is, maybe it's this House regrets the decline of tightly knit families, then you want to analyze the alternative. What if there are no tightly knit families? It would be families that are not so close, maybe, that don't live together, that don't talk as often, why it's going to be better. Yeah, so you want to like compare that, make sure that your benefits apply better on your side when that trend doesn't exist, when that phenomenon doesn't exist. So yeah, you want to have a very clear idea of what are the two worlds going to be. You want to define it, and then you want to compare things and make sure that your world is going to be better without that trend or phenomenon. So that's with those like trends kind of motions. The next type of motion is this House prefers motion. So it's usually things like this House prefers a world where something happens. Maybe this House prefers to be born with hyperthymestia, or okay, I think that's what it's called. Basically, it's that thing where you have like a photographic memory. Then you want to like construct a new world, how you would be different if you had hyperthymesia since the time that you were born, for example, how you're already used to this, how you already know how to adapt to the different experiences that you face, instead of like being suddenly given hyperthymesia, it's going to be very, very different. And in this way, you're going to be able to like construct like, I feel like natural ways that your new world is able to adapt to harms that the opponent would usually bring up, because it's a completely new world, or it's a completely new experience of living. So the people there, or the person there, has already like been in this world or this kind of condition since the time they were born. So it's likely that it's a completely different one. So even if things that are very complicated, like things like this House prefers a world where there's a global government, for example, then you're going to have to like construct how things are going to be very, very different from the status quo, and how people have already adapted to the usual harms. And then you focus then, after like analyzing how the world is different, that's when you can start looking for the benefits and harms that you usually do in the like common case building that people usually have. So that's with like this House prefers motions. But sometimes this House prefers motions can also be things that don't necessarily discuss a new world. It can just be this House prefers like this method of activism to that method of activism. But the main goal is just to compare actually the difference between X and Y. What are the like advantages and disadvantages of X and Y? And that's what you want to focus on in the debate. You have to make sure that when you talk about an impact, it's a benefit that is exclusive on your side, or it's a harm that is exclusive on the opponent's side and doesn't happen on your side. And that's how you win those kinds of motions, because you have to be like directly comparative. You have to know what the metrics are that are different. Maybe if it's methods of activism, then it's like, oh, there's more speed on your side for that activism, or there's more reach on your side because there's more attention and exposure that is produced from this method of activism. So it's those kind of things you have to be very, very comparative in these kinds of motions. But basically, the takeaway that I want you to have from this is actually not to always think that these kinds of motions are always going to be this way. This kind of motion is always going to have that burden of proof, because usually motions nowadays are very, very diverse. So this is more like a, like it's a guide if you're stuck. But the main thing that I want to tell you is you should never just look for an argument when the case building time starts. You have to look for what is the motion seeking to prove and what is your side's burden of proof. And that's where you have to direct the case. And as the debate goes on, if you're a responsive speaker, you also have to be actively aware of the burden of proof. So maybe if your opponent makes a weird case that is completely unrelated to the motion, then you can point out that they are not defending their burden of proof, or that that argument is just irrelevant because that is not what they are supposed to prove in this debate. So you have to be aware of this in order to like actually tell the judge that this is what the motion is about. And this is why my team is talking about this motion correctly. And this is why we're winning. So that's how you use the idea of burden of proof in a debate. Yep, we can go on to the next slide. Yep, so the next element that I think is very important for beginners is the idea of intent. So if burden of proof was something technical, that is a basic foundation that you should have in a debate, then intent is about your mindset. It's about what you think actively during the case building, during the debate as well. So I think intent is about knowing what you have to prove and knowing how you want to win. So it's about, why am I saying this point, right? As I wrote in the PowerPoint, it's for the adjudicator to give me the win. If not, I wouldn't be saying it. And this is something that even debaters at the national level sometimes struggle with, because sometimes they focus on explanations that are unimportant things. And the common examples of this are, if they like to talk about facts, they know a lot of matter, then they usually like to spend a lot of time on arguments explaining the facts about an IR context, for example. But maybe it doesn't really matter. Or maybe they like poetry and they like making flowery words, and they spend too much time doing that, but they don't focus on the actual things that are needed to prove the argument, for example. So every time you try to say something, the point is you have to know why you're saying it. You have to know that this is something that is going to matter in the debate, because otherwise that point is probably not going to help your team win the debate, or not going to increase your speaker scores, and it's probably better spent on something else. It also includes things like, for example, you spend too much time on talking about things that are actually non-contentious. So things that are non-contentious are things like, facts that both teams will definitely accept anyways, or things like the context of the status quo, what it's like, or things like setup even. I feel like, I don't really know why, but like in the few high school competitions that I've judged recently, I've been seeing teams with like super long setups, like 2 to 3 minutes of setup, even though the more contentious parts in the debate that are most important to be discussed are like these things inside the arguments, right? Because even though a setup is important, it's something that is only setting up what your team is going to like basically the stance of your team and where your team is going to stand on. It's only where you stand. It's not what you want to attack the other team with, right? That's what a setup is. And basically you don't want to spend too much time on just positioning where you're standing, but you want to spend more time on attacking the other team. You want to spend time on these things that are actually saying that your side is better or the opponent is worse. So those kinds of arguments, right? So yeah, you have to be actively aware that your point is going to do something in the debate. You have to be aware that maybe your opponent is currently having a disadvantage on this clash, and therefore I will exploit this clash because they couldn't rebut me here, and I will say to the judge that this clash is making me win the debate. So those are like the examples of how you do intent. It comes down to a lot of awareness on where you're winning, where you're losing, how you want to like offset that, how you want to change the your team's current position in the debate. You want to strengthen the advantages that your team are already having, and you want to like minimize the disadvantages that your team already has. So maybe you say that the clash you have a disadvantage on is a clash that is not important in the debate, or yeah, you can say that the clash that you're having an advantage on is something that is more important in the debate. But basically debate is an art of awareness, just like every sport. You have to be aware all the time, and you have to have that desire to win every time, and that's how you get to make the arguments that matter more, because you know why they're there, and you know that the judge is going to write that down and make it matter for you to win the debate. So that's a very, very important mindset to ask in general, like every time you do case building, or even during the time of your speech, you want to focus more time on things that actually matter. So that's what intent is all about. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Okay, the next thing is what makes arguments win a debate. And this is like, since this is just like the foundations of like what a beginner needs in debate, I'm going to mention this very, very generally, but arguments usually are just composed of likelihood and importance. It doesn't matter what kind of argument, whether it's like a practical or a principal argument, it still needs both of these. And usually the metrics at the end that a judge is going to like value your argument by is going to be this, like, does your argument have enough likelihood for it to be true? Is your impact actually going to happen, right? Are those harms that you say your opponent's world is going to suffer from actually harms that are going to happen? Or if they do happen, are they important harms? So this is what makes arguments win a debate. And you want to spend the same amount of time on both of these during case building and your speeches. So every time you make an argument, you have to make sure that it is likely that you have proven why those impacts will occur. And you also want to prove why that argument is important. So an example of this would be, if you're doing a motion about maybe this House supports truth and reconciliation committees in like post-conflict states, for example, then since this House supports motion, you want to prove like the likelihood of success of that Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So like, why is it going to run well? Why is it going to like actually, minimize the grievances of the conflict and such things? And after that, you want to prove the importance of that argument. So if you talk about minimizing conflict, for example, you talk about why it's important. You talk about how, the priority of a state that is just freshly from conflict is to try to find some unity so that they can rebuild the nation together, because it's usually in shambles, because it's usually, there's lots of like post-war destruction that's happening. You need everyone's cooperation in order to rebuild the nation. And the example of something that's bad, if you were debating that motion, would probably be something like, if it's a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, it's good because then you get to have people, I don't know, like you get to have people expose what they have. Like, you get people to acknowledge the wrongs that they have done, but maybe you don't explain the importance of that and how it contributes to the conflict, perhaps, right? So if you only like tell the judge that, this is good because you get people to confess that they have done these atrocities in the war, and that's it. You don't say why it's important. It's not going to matter in the debate. Or maybe if you say that this is going to help reduce the conflict, but then you don't prove the likelihood of that, then that is going to not win the debate because you didn't prove why it's going to reduce the conflict. So you have to pay attention to detail on both of these things. And sometimes what I see is like teams overlook the idea of importance because they focus on explaining why that argument is likely and explaining why they're delivering, why their points are true, but they don't really weigh this in a debate, which is very, very important, both in 3-on-3 formats and like British parliamentary formats. It's something that's very, very important. Like, why does that argument even matter? Like, why is this the most crucial thing that your team has to prove? Why is it impactful in the debate? You have to like prove that in order for the judge to like make sure they remember the argument and also make sure that that argument is something that they're expecting to stand until the end of the debate. So if you spend if you spend enough focus and enough attention and enough time on both of these things, your arguments are going to be way stronger in the debate. And if you're thinking like after the rounds, what you have to evaluate, what you could have done better, or even during the round after your partner has spoken and now you're trying to speak, you're like kind of confused what your team is lacking on. You want to check on the likelihood and importance points. So have I proved enough that this point is true? Have I proved enough that this point is important? You want to actively track this during the debate, and you want to actively track your opponent's fulfillment of these two things as well. You want to attack where they're lacking. You want to strengthen where you're lacking in the debate. And this also applies for principal cases. Sometimes teams would say that we protect freedom of speech on our side, but it's like, okay, why do you protect freedom of speech exclusively on your side? Why can't that be done on the opponent's side as well, for example? Or why is freedom of speech something relevant that we talk about in this debate anyways, right? Because maybe it's something that we accept as important in like, usual scenarios, like in our daily life, we think it's important. But if you don't prove why it's important in the debate, in the motion that you're talking about, then it's not going to be something that's important in the eye of the judge, because they don't know why you're saying that point. What if it's just a random thing that you're saying, like freedom of speech is just like, important in general? If you don't prove the importance, then the other team can just probably even dismiss that argument. Even if they don't rebut it, if it's not something that's important, they can just leave it out and think that it's just a throwaway point that's true in general, but not true or not important in this motion. So for all kinds of arguments, you want to prove both likelihood and importance as well to make sure that your arguments are going to stand. So it's mainly these two things that you want to keep in mind. And it's mainly these two things that you want to always evaluate your arguments on, where you need to improve and whatnot. Yep. Right. So that was what you needed to prove in an argument, and that was like the things that basically makes you win debates. Now I'm briefly going to talk about the things that coaches usually talk about when they like introduce debating to newbies. I don't know, maybe I just like to be a little bit like anti-mainstream on this, because it's more fun to talk about what makes you win first before like introducing like the technical parts of like types of arguments and stuff. Because I feel like if I introduce types of arguments first, then usually people's mindset will only be to like, okay, I have to look for these arguments, but not necessarily, I have to think about what makes me win first before looking for arguments. That's what I want you to do. I want you to think of how to win first. I want you to think of knowing where is your path to victory first before you make your arguments. But yeah, so these are the types of arguments that are usually existent in a debate. It's principal arguments, then practical arguments, then a principal practical argument, which not everyone talks about, but is something that is there and is something that is that you can use very, very strategically for yourself. So let's go through these one by one. Let's first talk about the principal argument. So a principal argument is essentially something that doesn't necessarily have an impact in the debate. So it doesn't need for an actor to do something or something to happen, but it is something that is still important morally. So it's moral arguments, things like protecting the freedom of speech, things like protecting the right for someone not to be used as a means to an end, protecting things like, freedom of choice, and basically the freedoms or the liberties that you think are important, freedom of religion, freedom of whatever it is. It's usually moral arguments in a debate. And these types of arguments are the types of arguments that don't need an impact for you to prove. And you want to like prove that your opponent is being immoral if they, if they try to like do their proposal or something, or their side is immoral because they let, because they let a violation of a certain freedom happen. Or maybe their side is unfair in the criminal justice system because their punishments are disproportionate, for example. And on your side, you protected in some way. And what I want to specifically talk about in this, in this lecture is probably how you want to prove a principal argument. I think there are certain steps actually to proving a principal argument. And it's not just like saying that this is a principle and we protect it and that's it. I feel like the first thing that you have to talk about is why is this something that's a right, and like generally why this is something that is relevant in the debate. So you want to think of that first, and then you talk about why it's wrong to infringe it, and then you talk about why it's infringed on your side, on the opponent's side, and then why it's protected on your side, and then you want to make an explanation of why it's important. Maybe this is a right that has been, upheld in the past. Maybe if you're talking about the criminal justice system, maybe you say that, well, punishments have always been proportionate, and that is the principle of justice that we have upheld, because justice is supposed to promote fairness, for example. Then you want to explain why why that principle is like consistent, why that is something that is important, why that is something that we have to keep upholding. And sometimes people forget to explain one of these like steps of proving a principal argument. Sometimes they forget to prove why is it a right, and then it gets obliterated by the opponent because they say this is not even a right, this is not even something that's important to uphold, so it's not something that you can something that you can run in the debate. Or maybe you forget to explain why it's wrong to infringe that right, or you forget to explain why that is being infringed on the opponent's side, and then they say, well, this right is not being violated on our side anyways, so this is not something that you can run. Or maybe you don't explain why it's being protected on your side, and then the opponent says, well, it's not protected on your side anyways, you're guilty of the same moral harm, and therefore your argument doesn't stand. So stuff like that. You want to like make sure that you explain basically the likelihood of why it's a principle, and then the importance of that principle itself. And in these, in doing this, like you have to not forget to be comparative. So explain what happens on their side and what happens on your side. So that's how you like deal with the principal argument. That's how you, that's a general idea of like a principal argument. And I'm not writing down the structure of this because I feel like it's not something that's very rigid or very, very, very fixed. It's more of things like things that are like a checkpoint or like a checklist that you want to have. You want to make sure that you've proven all these points in order for your argument to run. So that's what a principal argument is. What about a practical argument? A practical argument is an argument that has an impact. So maybe things like increasing participation to your social movement, or increasing economic growth in the nation, or things that are like, increasing or decreasing the effects of climate change. So things that basically happen, right? Things that have an impact, things that have an actor doing something, and then something happens after that. And both teams are trying to win this by explaining, why their impacts are much bigger, or why their impacts are much more important, or why the opponent's impact doesn't happen and theirs is more likely to happen. So that's what a practical argument is about. And the general like structure or general like checklist that you want to have for these practical arguments is basically, I think you have to explain the context and the status quo first. Generally, what is the world that you're in right now? What is the condition of your social movement, or what is the condition of the country right now? And then you want to explain what happens in that argument. So maybe if it's an argument about economic growth, then you explain that the country is currently a developing country. It has finite resources. Economic growth is very important. And then you explain why your side gets economic growth to that country. Maybe it's like, maybe through your policy. And I'm not going to state the motion because this is just a general example. Maybe what happens with your policy is you boost the agricultural sector, which is very, very prominent in your nation. And maybe you increase employment to those sectors as well, which makes it like productive because there are more people working on it. And then you increase the competition there so that it becomes very, very innovative and very, very competent in the global economy, for example. So you want to prove why it's likely on your side, like why benefits are likely on your side. And then you prove why this is actually something that is that doesn't happen on the opponent's side. You want to prove on their side that's not going to happen because maybe they just like neglect that, or maybe there isn't like competition, or there aren't like other ways to boost the agricultural sector, for example. And then lastly, you prove why it's important. So it's like roughly is like context, and then like why your benefits will likely happen on your side, why there are harms on the opponent's side, or why your benefits won't happen on the opponent's side. And then you want to prove why it's important. So you want to make sure that you prove all of this when you run a practical argument, so that you make sure that it's something that's like relevant in the context in the status quo. You want to make sure that your benefits are actually proven to be able to happen, and the opponent cannot achieve those same benefits. Instead, they're going to get harms on their side, so they can't say, well, we can get these benefits anyways, right? So you want to do something like that. And then lastly, you want to say why it's important, which is the part where most people miss out on, because they forget to explain why that is an impact that matters in the debate, why it's central to the motion. And then it just like, it gets overshadowed by an impact that the opponent runs, even if it might be silly, but just because they explain why it's important, maybe that can win the debate. So things like that. So that's what like a practical argument is about. The last type of argument is a principle practical kind of hybrid argument. So, and I think these arguments are not necessarily a blend of the two. I think it's something that is first mainly a principle argument, but then the part that you change inside the structure of the argument is the importance part of the argument. So inside a principle argument, maybe you can add the importance is not only that we are consistent in the justice system, but the importance is that we protect the closure of victims, for example, or we protect victims from getting harmed again in the future because of that retribution, because of that punishment that you give to criminals, for example. So it can have a practical importance, even though it's mainly a principle. The same goes for a practical argument. You can make a practical argument have a principle nuance in its importance as well. When you say that, so maybe things like boosting economic growth is also very, very important principally, because it protects the ones that are poorest, most vulnerable, and lack access to things that are very, very crucial things. Or maybe it also boosts equality at the same time, and that is something that everyone deserves. But basically, your arguments can be a hybrid in like when you go to like higher level debates. This is not something that I expect every beginner to be able to do, but I'm just introducing this to know that arguments are not always just principle or practical. Because if teams are only like, if you only know that it can only either be a principle or practical argument, sometimes you might be missing out on making practical importances to principal arguments, or making principal importances to practical arguments, even though you could in that debate. Even if it's difficult, maybe sometime you will think of it, but then because you weren't introduced to this, you think that that's just something you can't run. But feel free to experiment, I think, and feel free to like try to find out in what instances this can happen, because if you watch a lot of debate videos, then you know when it's happening. And I think the reason that this is important as well is because if the other team has a principal argument, you want to take it down with a principal rebuttal as well. If the other team has a practical argument, then you want to take it down with a practical rebuttal as well. If the other team has a principal practical argument, you want to take down both nuances and both scenarios where it's important to make sure that their argument doesn't stand. Because you can't just like rebut something with something else. That's usually called repeating your case, right? So you want to like deconstruct that argument, deconstruct those structures based on the like structure parts that I've told you about. Maybe they haven't proved a certain part of it, or maybe a certain part of the structure, which is the likelihood or the importance, is lacking. And then you want to attack why it's ridiculous on that part and such things. So yeah, that's what you want to do with these types of arguments, and that's what they roughly look like. Next. Yep. The next thing that I want to talk about is how do debaters actually improve? I think it's mainly three things. And this is also already arranged based on priority, at least from my opinion, because this is what works for me. I think the first and most important thing that a debater can improve by is by mapping out their strengths and weaknesses and training with awareness. And so it doesn't have to always be coaching all the time. Even some debaters can be good without having a coach. But regardless of whether or not you have a coach, what you want to do is you want to be aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are. Maybe you're good at building up likelihood, but you're not as good as you're not as good at building up importance, then you want to improve on that, and you want to train with awareness that you are trying to improve there. You want to put your focus on there, and you want to track yourself, like after you delivered a speech, have I improved on this bit that I'm lacking on? And that's the only way to like improve in training very, very effectively and very, very quickly, because otherwise, like, you might just be doing a lot of speeches, doing a lot of training, doing a lot of coaching, but if you don't have that awareness, you don't know like what exactly you're trying to improve on, then your improvement is going to be a hit or miss, right? Because you're just like, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll score a 78 in this speech. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll score like better than last time. But the score is not something you should care about. What you should care about is certain parts of your skill, like certain parts of your skill set that you are trying to improve on, and making sure that you master that part so that you have a sustainable, like, you know, sustainable strength that you have, that you want to keep on capitalizing on when you join competitions later on. So yeah, you have to be very, very aware of that. You have to like take notes of your coach's advice if you have a coach. If you don't, then maybe take note of the judges' feedback when you won or lost a round. Always ask for feedback. Yeah, like you want to actively be aware of what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. You want to maximize your strengths. You want to minimize your weaknesses when you train. And if you're not aware of that, I guarantee you it's going to be like, I don't know, probably 10 times slower. And this is, I think this is the reason why like a lot of young debaters can like surpass their peers who are much older, because they're much more aware on this and they actively work on it. So it's definitely not something that is impossible to do, no matter whether you have a coach or not, because I've seen like lots and lots of people doing it. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is debate videos. And I feel like this is something that allows you to, if you especially lack exposure, or if you especially cannot get coached for like very, very frequently, the way that you want to like catch up on what you've missed out on is by watching debate videos, because that means you can get like the same amount of experience as somebody who has gone through a lot of competitions, because watching those debate videos makes you feel like you are in that room and you're trying to think of the arguments that those people are trying to run. You're trying to rebut them as well. And you want to see how they are actually run, how they're actually rebutted during the round, because that allows you to get the knowledge that these debaters already have and hopefully implement it the next time you try to do your speech. So yeah, and feel free to like, put down your recommended debaters in the chat as well, if some of you know who they are. Dan Lahav, personally one of my favorites. I literally have like playlists of my favorite debaters on YouTube. So if you search my name, if you search like Jennifer Taruno, there are going to be 3 like playlists that I would recommend that you can watch for like debate videos. But basically they're really important because if you watch especially like very, very high quality videos that are like from the world's best debaters, then you're going to know how they think, how they structure their arguments, or how they deliver it as well, which you can try to sort of imitate. I wouldn't advise like copying someone's speech entirely, but basically you can integrate their strengths into your strategy, and like you can find out what works for you, and you want to try to be somebody who capitalizes on those same strengths like this debater does, for example, right? So yeah, you want to watch lots and lots of debate videos. I feel like this is the fastest way someone can improve, because I think learning by imitation, learning by like reference is the fastest way to improve. This is how like 10th graders have been NSBC best speakers recently, which is something that's like super, super amazing. So yeah, you want to do stuff like that. And it's really, really fun as well in general, just to like watch these people deliver fiery speeches and thinking of like, what if I could someday become someone like them? I feel like it's something that's generally really, really fun to think of. Yeah, the last thing is general knowledge about current issues. And this is what other people call matter loading, or knowing facts, or reading the news. I feel like this is actually lost in priority. Even though it's still important, it's lost in priority. And I want to flag that out really clearly, not because it's quite difficult to find matter that is actually effective and applicable to your debates, but because it's not something that is directly applicable, and it's something that's probably replaceable by the second thing, which is debate videos. Because if you watch debaters do IR motions, then you can see what their arguments are made up of and the facts that they use to support that argument. And you can just bring the same facts when you face a similar kind of IR motion, for example, right? So yeah, that's something that's I feel it's replaceable. Sometimes it can be overrated. I'm sorry for you who think otherwise, but I think so because it's quite difficult, right? But I'm going to defend the people who still think it's important and still tell you why it's at least quite important, right? Because the reason that it's still important is sometimes there are just very, very niche or very new issues that are not there in debate videos yet, but it's something that is huge and will definitely appear in a motion soon. So you want to only look for things that are going to be breaking news or really, really huge impact things to the world. So maybe things like cryptocurrency, it's only been rising since last year or since 2 years ago, I feel. And it's appearing in a lot of debates recently because chief adjudicators always want to make the most updated motions. So you want to read up on that exclusively because it's something that's going to be major. Or maybe it's things like Afghanistan, right? If it's last year. Or maybe it's things like Ukraine. Currently there's there's almost a conflict that's going to happen in Ukraine. I don't know how big it's going to be, but it's good to just basically know the general facts or the general headlines just in case it appears in the debate, because the things that you read here are likely going to be things that can be used in context in a debate, for example. So you know how strong a country is, whether China is currently stronger than the US economically, or in defense budget, or in their agricultural sector or their manufacturing sector. So you know specifically what is going to happen. This doesn't only apply to IR motions. It can apply to social movements motions. It can apply to economy motions. It can apply to a lot of things. But generally, having a habit of reading, gives you the knowledge that you need to construct likelihood points inside arguments, for example, right? But you want to always have a goal. You want to always have that intent when you try to look for matter online or offline, whatever you prefer. You want to have that intent of how is this going to be applicable in a debate? How is this going to be applicable in a motion? So yeah, that's the general advice that I would have for people in terms of looking for matter. And also, I think very, very important to point out, it's not just reading. You can literally watch debate videos. Sorry, not debate videos. I love debate videos too much. You can watch economist videos or DW News videos or Vox videos on YouTube. And that's still very, very helpful. Last year, no, 2 years ago, I feel half my debate matter files was actually compiled of was actually a compilation of just matter from Hassan Minhaj shows. And that's it. It's Patriot Act facts, because they're really good. It's really a shame that it ended. But it could be from stuff like that. It could be from Economist and Vox. Honestly, I almost never read. I only watch videos. It's probably better to read usually because the information is more detailed, but some people manage without reading. So yeah, that's something that's definitely possible as well. But that's all I'm going to say about how you can improve. So try to actively incorporate these 3 things into your habits if you want to be good at debating, if you want to start having fun, because once you start to find the spark and the satisfaction of being good, you're going to enjoy the sport. You're going to want to play it again because if you win, you know why you won. If you lost, you know why you lost, and you want to do it again because you want to do something differently next time, perhaps, and stuff like that. But knowing more makes you enjoy it more as well, and this applies to everything I feel. But yeah, next slide. Yep. So this is something that's probably very cheesy, but I feel like still a good example for newbies. This is Boso, a champion of probably the most popular debate video on the internet. World's Universities 2016 said that what you want to do to improve on debating is a combination of constant awareness and a commitment to improve. And that's what's going to make it very, very rewarding and like a very, very fun sport as well for you. Yeah. Yep, that's all I have to say for the seminar. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. If you have any questions, be it about the material of the seminar or just sharing some stories, as I said before, it's also definitely possible. If you want any advice on like NSDC, WSDC, or British Parliamentary Opens, I've been in all three of those, so very, very open to that discussion as well. So yeah, we can start the Q&A session. Okay, somebody raised their hand.
Okay. Oh yeah. Thank you so much for Jennifer, for Jen, and also it's very amazing and precious knowledge for us. Now let's jump to the Q&A session, and I'm sure that the audience is very excited. So you guys can directly type to the chat room if you guys have any question. All right, from Michael Jadin, what's the thing that gets overlooked the most in debating? And also from from Jason Shaw. Hello, I want to ask in PM speech, how should I integrate or give an important characterization in a way that not taking too much time because I have to go into the argumentation? And also from
I think there's lots of questions which we should just like go through them one by one.
Okay. Yes.
So let's just go from the first question. What's the thing that gets overlooked the most in debating? I feel like the number one thing is really intent. The thing that I talked about earlier. Like some debaters don't know why they're saying stuff, or like why, like what their speech is about. Like why are they saying this? They don't know why. And that applies for like the first 2 years probably of my debating career. And I quite regret that I didn't like learn about this, even though it's just a simple mindset thing. I didn't learn about it earlier. And that's like usually the source of like most problems for a debater, because their time is spent on things that are probably not important in the debate. So it's intent. But I think in general for newbies as well, it's important, because in BP debates, the way that you win arguments is by proving that your argument is the most important, especially when you have 4 teams that are compared against you. Even somebody that's on the same bench as you, right, can like make arguments that are better than you. They're still your competitors. So this is more prominent in BP than AP, I guess, because it's not just about proving the most things and rebutting the most things like AP, but it's also about importance as well. It's about like your 14 minutes up there. Why is it something that the judge should care about? So you have to care about importance. You have to talk about things like, the huge impacts that this makes, or how this is principally consistent to something, or how you're protecting the most vulnerable actors in the debate, or you're like, it's something that's a nation's utmost priority. You have to talk about things like that. You have to show the judge why they should care. Next question. In a PM speech, how should I integrate or give an important characterization without taking too much time, because you have to go to the argument section? This is a really good question, because this is something that I feel a lot of people struggle with. So the way that you want to do that is by noting what is something that is contentious and what is something that is not contentious. So if it is something that the opponent will agree on anyways, so for example, things like how digitalization is increasing, individualism is increasing, capitalism is something that's very, very prominent in the status quo, and a lot of people have to work their asses off. That's something that the opponent will agree on anyways. So you probably want to spend only 1 to 2 sentences on that, just because it's there as a premise or as an introductory section of your argument. But the most important stuff are the stuff that attack your opponent and make your side look better. So you want to focus on that much more. But the way that you determine that is by thinking, is the opponent just going to agree on this, or is the opponent going to try their hardest to rebut this? If the opponent is going to try their hardest to rebut this, then go on, talk about that point. If they're not, then spend only 1 to 2 sentences on that. Next question, how can you improve your debate, especially in case building, if you don't have someone to judge you? That's a very, very good question. And that's something that I struggled with for the few months that I didn't have a coach. Honestly, it's always best if you have someone to judge you. That's why I would usually jump into random sparring sessions. I frequent sadar sparring sessions, I feel, in 2020. But the question is not about that. The question is about how do you improve your debate if you don't have someone to judge you? I think the best way to do that is by looking for a debate video on YouTube, and then you only read the motion first, you case build it, and then you compare your speech to the prime minister that gave the speech. And definitely make sure it's a good debate video as well. Like, make sure it's a famous competition, and make sure the speaker is a good speaker. And then you compare what are the things that you can improve on if you see the speaker's speech and your speech. Maybe it's better in characterization, in rebuttal, maybe it's better in whatever that is. You can also try to since it's usually debate videos with all the speakers in there, you can try rebutting them and then seeing how the responsive speaker actually rebutted that point in the debate. And you can try to have that as reference so that you know where you can improve on. As long as you have that awareness on trying to figure out where you need to improve, I feel like that's definitely possible. Because the difficult part is not trying to improve, but it's being aware of where you need to improve first and having the awareness to constantly evaluate and improve on that. Next thing, it's very hard for me to practice due to the limited amount of time in debate. So is there any tips for self-training? Yeah, so tips would be really just that awareness thing. And maybe so that I'm not repetitive, I'll talk about how I actually did that. The way I did that was one time when I was when my improvement was quite stagnant, I mapped out all the previous tabs that I was in, and then by heading I classified each of them, which headings am I actually good at. At that time I found out that I'm bad at feminism, so I kept on asking people for advice, what to do in feminism debates, how do I improve on them. And then I watched feminism videos, I case built feminism motions, and I did stuff like that. And I also compiled the judges' feedback. So my feedback is usually maybe I'm bad at details back then, but I'm good at things knowing what the big picture is, what the burden of proof of the debate is, what the direction of the debate should be, but I'm bad at detailing and elaboration perhaps. Then I should improve on that. I feel like as long as you are aware of that, you can make it effective. So do whatever works for you, but the goal is just to know what you have to improve on and actively working towards it. Next question. Hello, I would like to ask, what are the examples of strengths and weakness as a debater? Because maybe that can help me to identify what are my strengths and weaknesses. Thank you so much. Yeah, so slightly already answered this with the previous questions, but sometimes it's either likelihood or importance. It's either argument making or deconstructing arguments. Usually it's either one of those. You're naturally good at either one of those, but you're not as naturally good as the other. Or big picture and details, that's a common one as well. Or maybe things like engaging to the worst case scenario or the best case scenario and engaging to the moderate scenario. Sometimes some people are better at engaging to extreme scenarios, but not as good as actually the obvious scenarios. That's something that's quite surprising, but I've seen that happen. Also, sometimes some speakers are better at making extension arguments rather than the prime minister's arguments. So yeah, those are probably the examples. But if you want to really, really detailed stuff on that, I have a video to recommend. I have to find the message for quite a bit. So there's I still have till 5:30, right? I think there's enough time for that. Let me look for the video. Okay, can't really find it. Let me just multitask and look for it while answering the other questions. Hello, in VP, and the opening side of our site is really good already. Already cover a lot of important and matter things. How do the closing side still can win? Thank you. So this is definitely, this definitely depends on what kind of debate you're in. Like it's something that's very, very scenario based, but if I'm given like the information that you've already given me and you want to think of so they've already got livelihood and they've already got importance, right? As a closing, the way that you want to win is either by having more likelihood or having more importance, which is something that's very difficult. That's the first way that you probably can win. If you are a content generator, it's something that's still usually possible. But secondly, I think the second way is trying to find out what was the deadlock in the opening debate, right? So what is something that is a characterization that both teams kept on disagreeing on, but you feel like that hasn't been resolved until the end of the opening debate, until the end of DLO's speech, it hasn't been resolved. And then you want to say that there has been a deadlock in the opening debate. So what you want to do is try to resolve that deadlock by providing maybe the weighing metric, comparative metric that breaks that deadlock, or the characterization that breaks that deadlock. So yeah, so you can try doing that, but I think there are lots of like advice on the internet as well. Like there are tons and tons, like tons of videos in the internet that talk about this. For example, you can have Tin Polich's seminar on extension, which is, if you don't know who he is, he was the champion and best speaker of last year's WUDC, Korea WUDC. So yeah, that's something that you can find. And there's definitely like more seminars today than 3 years ago. I feel like there's like 10 times more seminars nowadays. It's much easier with everything going online. So you want to like, if you want like detailed ways on how to do that, then you want to look for a seminar for extension or for closing debate. There are lots and lots of people who do that. Okay, so right, so the committee is asking me to send the video links to them. I'll just do that. Okay. Yeah, I rushed through all of those questions because there was a lot. I was kind of shocked, but I forgot to kind of like thank everyone for you know, asking each and every of those questions. That's really, really good. Love it. Love the engagement. I've given that to the committee. I've given all the links. Hello, this is a lame question, but have you ever felt intimidated by your opponent, whether it be from their status, well-known, or their debating style? As a relatively new debater, I kind of struggle with this. Do you perhaps have any advice on getting past such intimidation or pressure? Okay, great question. And since this is a seminar for beginners, I think the mindset that you should really have is that a debate is not won by who is more like famous or who is you know, more established as a debater, who has more experience, but who is most able to prove their arguments. And debate is one of the most objective sports that I've ever seen compared to any other sport. Like literally the judges have to have accreditations. You can score the judges, you can find out why you lost exactly. So it's one of the most objective sports. So I feel like it's about trusting the sport and trusting yourself as well. And the way that you trust yourself, which is probably the more important part, is that just sometimes it's good to pretend that you don't know your opponent, or that they're just some random person that's talking to you that looks smart, that tries to sound smart, but it's still possible to beat them because it's about like what you actually provide in the debate, how much contribution you actually give in the debate, right? And it's definitely possible for you to still find out where they are weak and where they are already strong, as long as you know like what are the metrics that a debate is won on, you can still find out what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, exploit their weaknesses, and try to tone down their strengths. And it's definitely still possible to win the debate. And I think it's also good for you to just like, try to push away that thought, because it's definitely something that doesn't always determine the outcomes of debates. There are lots and lots of people who have made surprising offsets in a debate. For example, NUDC, the last 2 years, it's consistently been won by universities that are not Indonesia's top universities, are not Javanese universities, which is amazing for the speakers from those universities to be able to do that and make that achievement. And if they can, then you can do it as well. It's something that's definitely possible. Right. Hello, have you ever been in an opposition team but personally agree with the government team? I've once struggled with this, which makes it harder to find arguments. Do you know how to overcome this kind of situation? I think I have. I've been in too many debates to remember like which instance I was in that kind of situation, but I think I have. So sometimes that means that can mean a lot of things. So because you word it out as personally agreeing with the government team, I assume that it's like your personal beliefs, right? So maybe you're politically aligned with what the government team is saying. But I feel like because debate is a sport, it's not something that is political or aims to solve actual problems in the world. Well, quite unfortunate, but it is. It's just a sport. So if you have personal beliefs, try to push them away and focus on things that are actually going to, win the debate. It might be, it might be heartwarming to see that you are being represented by the opponent's team. Maybe the issue is very, very personal to you, but you can still, like, because it's not your burden of proof to defend that kind of situation, then you still have to rebut them if you still want to, to win the debate. Yeah, and you have to counter that bias basically by consuming things that are usually out of the things that you already believe. So maybe if you're very, very liberal and you support things like minority movements very, very easily, then you sometimes maybe want to look at not why those movements are wrong, but what are the the shortcomings of those movements? Where have they sometimes done things that are like a bit mistaken or not strategic for their not strategic for their movement to do? You want to read the information or consume the information that is usually out of your personal political bubble, so that you know the opinions and you know the arguments for things that are not as conventional. Maybe this is easier for things that are economics based. So if you generally believe that giving people the freedom for their capital is good, you might want to look at the reasons for why some government control or a lot of government control on people's money is good. But actively consume like information that is contrary to your political bubble, and you will understand those sides more. And this doesn't even necessitate you to change your personal beliefs, right? Which is the art of debate. If you spend quite a lot of time on it, you will understand the different ways that people might think of something. But even after understanding all of those perspectives, if you still align with your belief, if you still can hold your belief very, very strongly, then you are somebody who is more deserving to hold that belief, because there are other opinions, but you still know why you're holding on to your belief. And you can still respect the other opinions while standing for your belief, which is something that's very, very good if you can do that. Right. If there are any other questions, just shoot them anytime. It's like tips for channels to watch, videos to watch, speakers to watch, whatever kind of question is fine.
Sampai jam 18. All right. All right, guys. So the time is 5 5:21. So we have like 5 minutes, and if you guys if you have any questions, you can type directly in the chat. And we will wait the question until 5:25. And if there is no question, then we will directly go into the photo station. And there will be some of announcement from the committee to you, to the participant guys. All right, guys, it's already 5:25. So thank you so much for Jen that already spent their time to deliver amazing debate materials, and thank you for the participants who had already joined this webinar. So we will have a photo session, quick photo session, and if you don't mind, you guys can open your camera. Please can talk. If you-
Okay, so I will take the picture. Okay, let's start from slide 1. 1, 2, 3. Okay, next slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you guys for opening your cam.
All right, so this is the end of the first station. But before we close the first station, we would like to inform you about our next speech event. Okay. So our next big event is Sanata Dharma Debate Open Competition that will be held on 19 to 20 March 2022 with our amazing adjudication course Kak Ushai and Kak Astri. And this competition is available for composite institution, for senior high school and varsity students across Indonesia. And also, if you guys want to join the competition with your coach, yeah, you guys are very welcome in this competition. And if you guys are interested in this competition, you can directly contact me. So I think that's all to sum up this the first station. Now it's the break time. Now it's break time. You guys can eat and do prayer if you want. And we will back at 18:30 waktu Indonesia Barat. Thank you guys for your time, and I hope you can enjoy this webinar session. All right, we're back to the second session. So it's a pleasure for me to be the master of ceremony of this event. Considering this event is held virtually, you may share your expression and excitement by using the comment section or emojis provided by Zoom, because I believe there should not be a limit for us to have fun and learn in this event, even though we can only see through our screens. But before we continue to the second session, I would like to introduce our speaker for this session, Kak Astri Agustina. Astri is one of the most fiery debater I've ever known, and the most prominent debater because she has actually been in debate for more than a decade, and she's one of the dino in Indonesia's debating circuit with amazing achievement of debating both in national and international. Also, if you happen to meet Astri in a debate competition, you will know that Astri, she's never missed to snatch the top 10 best speaker title. So who's actually Astri? Astri is the champion and overall best speaker of Kalimantan Open Debate 2021, the first runner-up and second best speaker of Hasanuddin British Parliamentary Open 2021, and the champion and fourth best speaker of Atma Open 2021. Astri also managed to judge several national and international debate competitions, such as Open semi-final judge ANU Pre-Austral 2021, Open Grand Final judge Wido 2021, and the invited adjudicator NUDC 2021 and 2020 and 2021. So that's all to sum up who's actually Astri in Indonesia debating circuit. Now let's start the second session with Astri about how to be a good prime minister. So Astri, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Natasha. By the way, committee, I will be much more comfortable if I can be sharing the screen myself, because I will juggle between my PPT and also several videos and some other files. So I will rather manage the PPT and screen sharing by myself. Thank you very much. Before starting the overall, the discussions and whatnot, first of all, of course, for inviting me. Thank you very much. I think we have been having a long-term cooperation for almost like 2 or 3 years. Thank you for not kapok inviting me. And second of all, obviously, thank you very much for every one of you who are present today in this seminar. I hope whatever is the reason that you guys here are going to be achieved by the end of this seminar, knowing that it is also a recording and be broadcasted through YouTube. Also is thanking everyone who take their time to watch my video. Again, hopefully you will achieve whatever you are expecting to achieve by watching my video. In order to ensure that, first I'm going, and because, this is an online competition, online seminars, it is so super weird if there is no some sort of interaction, and I would like to start my seminar with some interaction from the audiences. And I would rather if you guys opening your mic or opening your camera while answering this question, so that it's not that, metaverse, virtual reality type of short, but I can actually see and hear you. So before I start, I want to ask, I'm not gonna point finger, but I'm just gonna ask you guys, what did you expect when you hear this seminar title, how to be a good prime minister? What is the motivation? What drives you here? What is your expectation of these seminars? Anyone want to start answering that? What do you guys expect when you enter the Zoom for this seminar? Anyone? Yes, I hear someone's unmuting. Go ahead.
I'm actually expected to be more, at least knowing what should the prime minister do, or like have to tell in their arguments, since I am a really beginner in the debate. So I want to know, especially in this role, how should I debate, or how should I speak? That's from
Thank you, Andini. Thank you so much. And again, thank you very much for being present in here. So you basically, quote to quote, for the lack of a better word, sorry saying this, but it is very common and very normal. This is a new activity, sports or type of competitions that you are entering. Obviously, you think that you have no clue on what to do as a prime minister. I hope presentation will definitely help you in pursuing that. Anyone else? What is your expectation here? Being present, probably I'll do 2 more. So I have 3 different expectations from people. Yes, I see someone is unmuting. Anyone?
I'd like to try to make better use of case building since the time is pretty limited, like half an hour, and I'm sort of 10th grader, so I'm gonna need all the help I can get.
Excuse me, limited in terms of what? Can you elaborate?
It's only half an hour, case building, so yeah. Usually.
So,
I
because
want to
you
make better use of it, make it more effective. Yeah.
okay, so because you usually go in 30 minutes case building, you want to know what to do in 15 minutes case building. Am I
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Anyone else? One more. What is your expectation in coming into this presentation? Going once. Going twice. Okay, then we'll proceed to the PPT. It's okay. I'm not gonna like drag you guys. I mean, probably you are already being voiced out by other people when saying what they expected to receive in this presentation. Okay, so here comes the presentation. By the way, just per Natasha said, I'm a very expressive individual. So my PPT will going to be full of animation and also being expressive. Yeah. But before starting this, reason why I actually do better in explaining what to do in Prime Minister, because I was instinctively a response speaker. For me, rebuttaling, responding point comes naturally. So it took me a while trying to transfer that particular knowledge to other people. How do I come up with responses? But in the opposite, because I'm not instinctively substance speaker, we call Prime Minister the first speaker as substantive speaker. So I actually make a lot of effort and take lots of time to learn and how to navigate how to become Prime Minister. So that's the first disclaimer. This is going to be a step-by-step of being a Prime Minister. But number two, most importantly, this is a PPT or a step that I try to make it as updated as possible. So some of you probably has a previous, understanding of what Prime Minister is, or some of you even already been coached or already listen or present in my other seminars about Prime Minister. But this is the most updated version. I try to compile, I try to fit in the most recent trends expected from Prime Minister and arguments in general. But second of all, yes, this is for beginners class, but I'm trying to make this PPT to be as applicable, irrespective of whichever level of debate that you are. Are you a beginner? Are you a medium debater trying to advance yourself, or are you an experienced debater trying to find an alternative way to deliver your point? So yeah, I mean, as per I said, my PPT will going to be super expressive, a lot of colors and whatnot. I always write down it's compiled, because I believe that there is nothing new under the sun, and especially in terms of debating. This is a knowledge I derive both from my experience and also other seminars beforehand. And there are, at the very least, two expectations of people coming into these presentations. Number one, knowing what should the PM do, especially as a beginner debater. And number two is obviously the efficacy of case building. The order of presentations will going to be four. I'm going to talk about four things, but the fourth one, I'll see if we have enough time to do that. First, I'm going to start with, this is very important. In order to curate the best possible speech that you have, whether you are a prime minister, leader of op, or any position in debate, you should know and understand what actually judge expect from your performance in whichever position, less about the fulfillment of speaker's role, because the current trend of judging already promote and trying to advocate that judges should not impose a heavy value on a specific role fulfillment, but more on what will appeal the most for judges when you become a prime minister. Second, I'm going to talk about the case building process. So we start from the beginning. Case building. In case building, I'm going to talk about two things. First, I'm going to talk about the mindset in entering case building process, meaning the mindset you have right when motion is being launched, and by the time you either enter the breakout room for case building or enter the WhatsApp call, Gmeet call, whatever it is you are using to case build with your friend, with your teammate, what type of mindset should you have? Number two, I'm going to talk about the case building process itself. What should you be thinking about during case building? Hopefully also answering the questions about time efficacy in case building. And number three, I'm going to talk about structure. I'm going to talk about two things in terms of structure. Number one, your structure in the speech. So what should the PM speech consisted of? And number two, I'm going to talk a little bit about the structures within the arguments itself. And lastly, if I have the time, I will going to try to make an ideal speech workshop, meaning I will going to ask randomly out of you, or if any of you want to, we will going to try to make a prime minister speech together. Together here means that I will be case building with you, and then we'll probably give a very quick case building process. Let's say 5 minutes case building, and then you try to arrange the speech and try to speak if we have the time. I don't know, though. We'll see. Okay, so moving on to the first part. Someone asked me if I would want to share my PPT. I don't mind, but you'll see from my presentation that my PPT is pretty much like my speech paper. There nothing is to it. My PPT is simply a function for the visual aid. I don't really write the explanation or content. So, but yeah, feel free. First, I'm going to talk about what are the judges' expectations. It means what are the judges looking for in an ideal PM speech, or how to best or how to get maximum score out of your prime minister speech. So how to identify? As per I said, I try to make sure that my PPT is as updated as possible. That's why what I'm sharing is the process, not the end result. I will going to translate what is the result of this identification. But my point is, you need to, whenever you enter a new competition, make sure that you enter this new competition with a fresh mindset. Maintain curiosity. Don't think like, oh, I've joined debate for like 2 years, I know what to do. No, that's the arrogance usually what makes you fall. I mean, without trying to be arrogant, I'm so sorry, but the reason why, despite being in debate for so long, I think the last competitions I compete in was FT. In one of the round, I get best speaker. I entered the grand final too. One of the main reason is that I always try to stay updated with the new kids. Like, you guys are younger, smarter, sharper brain, but I try to always update myself, as one of which is in 3-on-3 we have a new standard from Nepal Australs. In BP we have a new standard coming from Astana 2020. So I keep on I make sure that I keep on learning and see what the competition expect me to be. 3 things you need to do in order to identify what will the judges of that specific competitions going to expect for you to bring. Number one, you need to pay attention to the debate and also the judge seminars. Don't wave it out. Don't don't not read about it. No matter how long you have been debating, no matter you already champion how many competition, there will always be something new. There will always be a new debaters better than you. You need to update yourself, pay attention to the debate and judge seminars. For example, the motions of this house regrets or this house prefers, saying that it's about a the counter narrative or the alternative universe is remotely very recent. It's only like, I don't know, 4 or plus 5 years. It's pretty recent context in debating. So you need to update yourself whether the motions occur and what is expected out of that particular motion. So always pay attention to the debate and judge seminars. And number 2, what you need to do is to make sure that you look at the scoring standard. I'm going to give you 2 examples of scoring standards. This is the reason why I want to navigate around the PPT by myself, because I will jump in between different things. So this is what we currently are using in BP debating, the Astana EUDC 2020 standards. Note, this is E standard that is executed in 2020. If I'm not mistaken, it's around in the middle of 2020, so around July or June. So it's very, very recent, only a year or a year and a half we have this particular standard. What do you do by me saying that look at the speaker standards? Identify which scores, which bracket you want to be in. For example, you want to be in this bracket, so you need to read the explanations. Number 1, if you want to be a 76 to 78 speaker, you want your arguments to be exclusively relevant and address most of the core issues. So it means that this translates into the judges will expect you to either A, answer the burden of proof of the motion as directly as possible, as suitable as possible, or at the very least explain why what you bring is the most relevant issue to be discussed in the debate. Especially EUDC is in BP system, meaning that you need to compare yourself between all the other 4 teams, and for some reason OG is the most scary position. I don't understand why, because OG actually is fun. If I become PM in OG, I can literally just like sleep after my speech. No, you should not copy that, but you know what I mean. And being OG does not mean you will not win. I will going to give one of the examples of how Prime Minister win the debate even since their speech. So the secret was to be as exclusively relevant and addressing the core issues. To add to that, saying it explicitly to the judge, this is the most relevant issue and core issues within the debate. Although, despite already answering the core issues, it's okay if you are aiming to be 76, 78 speaker, you have deficit of explanation, simplistic argumentation, peripheral or irrelevant arguments. But it does not mean, notice the difference between 76 and 73 is that in 73, 75, the arguments, despite being logical, tend to be simplistic. While in 76, 78, not too often, you slip into that. So the elaboration still important. What is expected in elaboration, I'm going to explain it later. So this basically is what I meant by look at the speaker score standard and try to dissect what do they mean and what do they expect out of that particular standard. That is from BP. You'll see that in Australs, it's not that different. For example, you will see in Nepal Australs, speaker score standard. Hold on. In Nepal Australs, because in Australs the range is more narrow, it's between 70 to 80. That's why it's even much more tight, the differences between each bracket. The average bracket is here. Again, the world relevant. But it's okay only sometimes to have gaps in logic, points in peripheral or irrelevant material, simplistic argumentation, but not too often. But note the most important keywords are twofold actually. Number one, relevant, and number two, it's the degree or the extent whether your speech becomes easy to follow. This is not about your fluency in English, but this is about your structure. Tin Pulyik is an ESL speaker. Despite that, managed to win the WUDC 2021. It shows to you that it is less about the English ability. I mean, a lot of you know, like Pulyik's competitor in that competition was a native English speaker, an EPL, English as their primary language, but still wins anyway. So it's more on how you structurize and use and the most effective diction or word or vocabulary, and also obviously your logic. Thirdly, what do you do in order to stay updated, stay in the know on what the judges want? Obviously, number three, stay updated with the recent development of debating from so many array of method. Never miss to watch the most recent video in competitions, especially the most prominent one. For example, we just finished IVET 2022. You would wanna take a look at the video of that competition to know who win, how did they win, what type of motions that are now prevalent in the debating world, what type of arguments that are now prevalent, and don't forget to also watch international competitions. Some of the prominent ones are, I'm gonna type it down in the chat. Some of it is you need to find Dogsbridge. There also is obviously WUDC, duh. And then HWS round robin. Round robin means it's a round for master debaters, and usually for you to compete in round robin, you need to receive invitation. So you cannot just, apply for round robin. You cannot register for round robin. Now, next, what does then it translate into? It translates into what the judges expected of you as the first speaker are these two things. Number one, judges expect you to provide your stance within your prime minister. The metric or the standard that the judge will going to measure whether or not your stance is good is when your stance is clear. Remember, it's clear, not extensive, and don't beat around the bushes. So just explicitly say what is your stance. What actually is stance? The two ideal standard of good stance is a direct and detailed. So don't beat around the bushes. Detailed, but not detailed, but as relevant as possible. I'm going to talk about the content of stance later in the structure of speech. Number two, what is also expected out of the prime minister is the main arguments. How do we identify, or how do we figure out what actually is the main arguments of the debate? You see it from the motion relevance. Identifying whether or not you are relevant to the motion, you can use two things. First of all, you can see from the types of motions. There are several types of motion. For example, as X in an actor motions, you talk about a specific interest. This one of the example of this is that, for example, this house as a parents of minority community will not going to allow our kids to express their religious belief. So the main relevance in an actor motion is achieved when you can manage to create an analysis what actually is this actor want, what is their interest. So not just merely talking about freedom of expressions of children is limited by parents. Those are a debate. We're saying that whether or this house as parents will going to limit children's religious expression, but this is way deeper than that. This is not only you as a parent in general, but you as parents coming from a minority community. What differ than what is exclusive interest that parents coming from minority groups have, especially in correlation to their children expressing their religious belief. So if you bring an argument saying that, parents will always have bigger authority than their children, or parents have more responsibility to take care of their children, therefore parents also serve the right to control their children in one way or another as long as no direct harm. This is not the most relevant argument because it's too general. You need to make it as relevant as possible as per what the motion required. The other type of motion, which is this household or this house belief that, so hold on a second, my phone is ringing. I'm turning it off. Wait. I is back. Okay, second of all, this house will policy motion or policy execution, or this house belief that should. Now, the most, in order for you to be as relevant as possible in this motion is by explaining what actually is the problem. Because it's so easy for op team, if you don't explain what is the main problem, for the op team to simply saying that, oh, well, your solution probably is good, but that's not going to solve the main problem. For example, in the motions, this house would criminalize littering. Proposition side of the house will going to say that, oh, okay, criminalizing littering will going to make people stop throwing garbage or throwing trash in inappropriate places, talking so long about how this is good to stop people from littering. But then opposition side of the house come up and saying that, yeah, okay. Littering is bad. Criminalizing probably going to stop people from littering. But the question is, proposition failed to explain why we need to go into the extent of criminalizing this individual. Because if we want to stop people from littering, we can just simply give them an education, or number two, building up an awareness, or number three, providing an sufficient enough infrastructure in order to persuade or in order to make people throwing litter easier, becomes much more affordable and accessible for the society. Now let's move on in a discussion of why criminalizing is bad. Now, because you don't explain the urgency, the main issue or the main harm of littering, that it deserves to go to the extent that it must be criminalized, opposition like having an immediate party and saying that, okay, yeah, we're not going to argue it will be effective, but we are going to argue it is the wrong approach or it is the harmful approach. Type of motion is this house belief that motion, value judgment, whether something is good or bad. I will give a deeper example in this, and I think you are most familiar with this house belief that. Now on the this house regrets, this is the most important thing that often often fail to be provided by speaker and especially prime minister. In a this house regret or in this house prefer, basically motion talking about an alternative world, an alternate universe, you need to also create your own world building. So in a this house regret motions, for example, this house regrets if I'm not mistaken, I have, for example, this house regrets the industrial revolution. You need not only to explain why industrial revolution, when it happens, is bad, but provide the counter narrative world. So we regret the industrial revolution What we will going to support or champion is this instead or that instead. So the world building, the counter narrative universe that you think is going to happen if A or whatever is said in the motion didn't happen, and why your alternative is better than whatever in the motion. So you need to say that if industrial revolution didn't happen, yes, monarchy will going to persist, but monarchy will going to have a self lesson and make them to be a better monarchy the way that Britain become a better monarchy right now. And if a benevolent monarchy is a lot better than capitalism that later become the byproduct of industrial revolutions. That is an example of providing a world building as a counter narrative of what you are regretting. This house prefer, similar, comparing alternative reality. This house support or this house oppose. Obviously, it's about listing the harms and or benefits. But this, notice that in this house support and this house oppose, it's about the fight of what has the more harms and the more benefit. Question then arise. So will the judges be, taking tally of, well, who has the more harms, who has the more benefit? It's ridiculous, obviously. Under that logic, you can just like throw 20 harm in your speech in order for you to win. That's not it. But in a this house support or this house opposed motion, make sure that you also explain the quality of your harm or benefit, why then it is a significant harm or a significant benefit irrespective of the quantity. So that's the, the type of relevance that necessary for you to be explained in a this house support / this house opposed motion. Okay, so first, to be relevant to the motion, you need to identify the type of motion. But note, it's not, this is not physics or this is not chemistry. This is not math. Debate is not a science that has a one formula fits all. You need to also make sure that you read the motion in its entirety, figure out the keywords. For example, in my example, I give two different type of motion, this house opposed and this house would. In this house opposed, the narrative that college education is necessary. The main keyword of this motion is narrative. So you are not opposing college education. You are not opposing you are not opposing that college education is bad. That is not what you are trying to argue. But what you are trying to argue is on the narrative. What do then narrative means? Or what does narrative translate into? Narrative translates into so many different definitions. It's up to you, obviously. I'm just giving you example. For instance, in this motion, this house oppose the narrative that college education is necessary. You will going to explain that the idea of narrative, it means threefold. Number one, it becomes the general norm within the society. And when it becomes the general norm of the society, there is a push, there is a force coming from the society to make sure that people are entering college education. Number two, because this is a general norm of the society, when people are not succumbing into the norm, there are negative stigma for people who are not entering the college educations. Number three, most importantly, because this is a norm and there are a heavy narrative talking about this, a lot of infrastructure support and a lot of infrastructure are to focusing in developing the college education only and not developing either any other form of education or trying to develop another alternative infrastructure for people who either A, cannot pursue college education, not because of the reason of affordability, because yes, opposition may argue that they can have scholarship, but not all people can afford scholarship, it's limited, or not all people have an inherent interest to pursue college educations. But number two, there is also no support for people who instinctively has a belief of not to pursue college education under the logic of opportunity cost. For example, you need to directly support your family despite having a scholarship for you to go into a college education, but because you cannot directly work, you cannot support your family right away, and or there are no available option for you in the working world because there are this huge narrative college education is necessary. All available job field require you to be a college graduate in order for you to pursue. So you are not against or opposing the college education, but you are opposing the narrative and explain such a narrative as I gave you the example about. If it was too fast, just play the YouTube and slow it down. Okay, this also would introduce racial quotas for healthcare professionals. Hold on, minum dulu habis merepet aus coy. This house would introduce the keyword is not racial quotas or healthcare professionals, but the main keyword is introduce. You need to ask yourself, what does introduce here means? Introduce here means, at the very least, one, the system was not present beforehand. So there was no racial quotas before. You are going to be the one introducing it. What does it mean then? The reason why it didn't occur, why then racial quotas become necessary. Number two, what is the different extent between introducing and implementing? So will introducing simply, like you introduce your significant other to your parents. Okay, hi mom, this is my boyfriend, introduction, that type of introduction, or like saying to the society, hey, there is a racial quotas. Or does introducing mean you want to ask for bill or for regulation? So you need to ask yourself, because there is this particular keyword, not automatically jumping into saying that, oh, in a healthcare industry we have limited equality, racial equality, we need to change this. Not jumping immediately to that, but understanding first what does the word introduce means. And lastly, obviously, is the burden. But apparently there are three things. Ha 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 ha. But I promise I make this PPT myself. I just sometimes forget things. The scene. Okay, so thirdly, the burden. What does this mean? I mean, BOP and whatnot. You need to limit even since the get-go, but usually you either do this while you are explaining your stance. So this is our stance and etc. yada yada. Or if I'm not mistaken, I can change the color of my laser pointer. But yeah, not important. Maaf. Around here, like after you explaining your stance, what are you trying to prove? What you are proving is going. What you are proving will win the debate, or what the opposition need to prove. Or you can also do it in between or right after each of your arguments, saying that, okay, blah, 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 I already explained this. This is a debate winning argument because I managed to prove one. That is also explaining the burden. But nonetheless, you need to make sure that whenever you speak within a debate speech, you have a limited amount of time. You either have 7 minutes or 8 minutes. So you make sure that every single word or sentence that you say means something, has certain function. So that's what it means by explaining the burden or claiming the burden for your team and the opposite teams, in order for you to know, making sure that you seal the deal, explaining to your adjudicator, hey, me merepet tadi, me ngemeng for like 3 minutes straight about the right of minority. It's not just like generally talking about the right of minority, but what I was doing in my speech, I proved to you how we will going to protect the most vulnerable actor required by the motion. So you need to explain that explicitly to the adjudicator to make sure they don't miss it. Yeah. Okay. Secondly, I'm going to talk about case building process. Yeah, what to do when and how. What to do when and how. Nggak menjawab pertanyaan. Yeah. Okay, so there are 3 mindset you need to have upon receiving motions. Yeah, muter. Okay. Number 1, the very first mindset, what you need to think of, it's not the argument, but what does the motion mean? What do the CAP want for us to explain throughout the motion? So what does the motion mean first, becoming your priority? Next, your stance. So you already know, oh, okay, so this is what the motion wants. That's the general definition, or what do the motion want in general, right? But you need to then think as your position. Are you prop or op? Are you OG, OO, CG, or CO? What is your stance in regard to answering what do the motion wants? Lastly, what you need to think, this is what you need to think, yeah? This is just a mindset, not the process of case building. How do my team win? These three are things that overlooked by debater during case building. Reason number one, either because they are too focused on thinking of the arguments, or reason number two, they are too focused in, ooh, I'm going against Dino. Ooh, my opponent is really good. You don't think about that. You don't give a fork about who your opponent is or what the argument is yet. You think of these three things first. What does the motion want? Second of all, stance. What do my team win? Now, the most often overlooked is the number three. You don't think of how you win in your case building. You simply want, oh, I want to bring principal argument. I want to bring practical argument. Yeah, okay. But will that principal argument make you win? Or what type of principal argument that will make you win? So think of these three things when you case build. And the next question, what if I don't know how to win in this motion? I'm gonna give you an example, and if you still don't understand, we can have Q&A question later. Okay, so example, in a motion of this house prefer a moral system that perceives morality to stem from duties as opposed ketutupan, as opposed to apa, bro? Oh, as opposed to rights. What does it mean? It means that number one, what does the motion mean? In my head, I will going to immediately think of, okay, so this is a comparison motion. So this house prefer motions. I'm not even thinking of a setup yet. I don't think of setup arguments yet. I'm just thinking that this motion wants me to compare two different origin of morality. Stem means derived or originated from. So, or being translated from, or yeah, whatever is that wording. So in my mind, I immediately think this is a motion about comparing two different origins of morality and which origins is going to be better. Number two, my stance will be, number one, it's an obvious duh, because I'm the prime minister, I'm going to support that it is originated from duties. But the second question is the most important one. How will the impact be different? Or in general, you need to ask yourself, what will be the main delta, the main contention, the main tension between you and your opponent? I will going to support that it is originated from duties, but what would be similar from both sides of the house? Okay, what's similar is that under the two morality standard, people will do good. I mean, morality, it talks about how will people do good. What other similarities? Under both morality standards, there will be an education teaching people what is morality. The way that we teach people about morality in Satu School, we can either use the philosophical morality resources, we can use law or regulation from the government, usually law and regulations projects what the principle of morality in within that society, or we can also use religion. So two things are going to be similar. Number one, people will still, the good people will still do good. Number two, there will still be an education. This means there will be no debate, ooh, if morality stems from duties, people will going to be more evil. Or, ooh, if morality stems from rights, people will be more evil. No. Good people will be good in both modes. And there should be second, and there should not be any arguments either coming from your opponent or your team saying that, ooh, people will not going to understand the concept of duties, or ooh, people will not going to understand the concept of rights. No, there will still be an education. So you at the very least know what arguments or what issue should not be discussed within the debate, and you can focus more on creating what is the most relevant and the most important issue to be talked about within the debate. Lastly, number 3, how do my team win? Firstly, you can only win if you manage to explain the exclusive net benefit, referring to my this house will criminalize littering example. Number 2, you can also win if you can manage to explain an independent point, be it justification or principal argument that is independent from impact, or an impact that is independent from justification or principal analysis. This is an example of what do I think of when I see this comparison motion. Because comparison motion, you need to have the most exclusive net benefit, the most exclusive delta. Now, next is the process. Ooh, there is a princess with 2. Sorry, maaf, nggak penting. Okay, number 1. After you have the right mindset, if you ask me how long should you have that mindset, to be honest with you, I usually do that in like 30 seconds after the motion launch. But you can, allocate around like a minute to 1 minute to 2 minutes with your teammate to talk about these 3 things. So this is a discussion between you and your teammate. Okay, so you duduk nih, case build. You ask your teammate, motionnya maksudnya apa ya? And don't forget to stop watch yourself too ya. Jadi every time you are case building, you need to also stop watching yourself. How long is the case building time so that you don't become clueless? Ya, iyalah, if it's 15 minutes case building, all of a sudden not effective, and you have to speak right away if you don't time yourself, especially when you're with your teammate, because you guys are chatting, and when you guys are chatting, it will going to time will apply so quickly and so easily. So you either allocate a minute to 2 minutes to discuss these 3 things first with your teammate, and next you will discuss these other 3 things together, but only after the mindset is fulfilled. Number 1, you ask your teammate or you make it yourself. It's okay. Prime Minister should know that they need to make a context and adding the stance. I'm going to explain what is what you need to say or put or include in context. Just enjoy the animations. I really take time. I make the PPT for like, I don't know, an hour probably, but the animation took me like 3 hours. Just kidding. Okay, number 2, you need to think of the strategy. This is important. You need to at least think of 3 things. Number 1, what will be the specific metric of the judge to determine who wins the round? Either you say that the team who will win the round is the team who managed to protect the most vulnerable stakeholder, for example, or the team who wins this debate is the team who can manage to solve this problem. So you decide the strategy, what is a specific metric for you to push the adjudicator to see the debate as. Number 2, you need to also talk about stakeholder, who will be your main stakeholder to be upheld, and who will be the less prioritized stakeholder. In order to know what? In order to know next what to concede. Okay, in this house prefer morality to stem from blah blah blah, not rights. You concede that individual will going to respect individual rights less because it discussed about duties. The principal discussion you can learn from a very philosophically deep book called Divergent. Haha, just kidding. But in a Divergent, it talks about how trash is on a constant dilemma between her own expression vis-a-vis her duty to either the community as a whole or to the she's not from Amity, she's from something else, but anyone who watch it, you know, understand what I mean. So you will going to be trading off, or you need to concede, yes, Trish will not going to have individual or personal right, but it's okay, because at the end of the day, we don't live our life as an individual human being. All of our life is the compilation of the help, support, investment of multiple support systems that we have. That's why duty should be the priority, irrespective of rights, not to mention now. So not to mention, usually when we're talking about rights, it tends to be very selfish. It will not going to create a universal and communal benefit for all. We are okay to trade off individual rights. So you need to know, understand, and be brave to concede on some things, because you cannot and will never be able to win in everything, be it in debate or in life in general. You need to let go of some things. Don't rakus, because you will going to end it up either inconsistent or even worse, contradiction, and you even become lost further. Apa sih gue? Ya itu. Okay, thirdly, now after you're done with all this context strategy, only then you will think of an argument. Yes, it should be the last thing, the very last thing to be done. In terms of time allocation, so 1 to 2 minutes, you think of the mindset, you think of those 3 questions. Context should require less than 2 minutes, so 2 plus 2, 4. Strategy probably is going to be longer, 3 minutes, so 4 plus 3, 7. You have around 7 minutes to make your arguments, and that should be more than enough, because you already answered all of those questions beforehand. Arguments then will going to come natural. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about structure. What to say, when, and how. Structure of speech. Simple. As I said, 2 things. In your speech, you need to talk about setup and arguments. As a prime minister, super easy. Set up. 3 things in set up. Number 1, context. What should context contain? Context should contain 2 things. First, definition. Note, this is not a definition from dictionary, but this is a definition of the motion. For example, in the this house will criminalize littering. You will going to talk about what littering means. Does littering here means you throw the package of your candy, or littering here means waste or pollution done by corporation, or are you going to talk about both, or what? So that's what the definition means, not like, oh, littering means apa ya, whatever it is in dictionary. So you need to explain the definition of context, the definition of the motion, or it could also be a definition of where the debate happens. For example, this house this house regrets Joe Biden's decision to leave Afghanistan. So the definition will going to be, what do you mean by Joe Biden leaving Afghanistan, and what is the counter alternative, or the counter narrative, or the alternative work that you would want Joe Biden to do instead in dealing with Afghanistan issue? That also is the definition. Simple, concise. Remember, the nature and essence of definition is to clarify the discussion. So make sure that your definition is not overly complicated, resulting in the debate becomes unclear. So that's the nature of definition here, not how long the definition is, but how clear. And since it's about clarity, the more concise it is, the better. Next, you talk about the problem identification, or generally the reason why the motion appeared. For example, in the motion grand final IVAD, I don't forget, grand final WUDC, WUDC grand final talks about how WHO will going to force all countries to disclose. I forgot the wording, but it's basically about WHO. We are going to force every country to share the information related to health and whatnot within the country. So obviously, the reason why the motion appeared is related to COVID-19 information, but not just that. But the reason why the motion appeared is because WHO find difficulties in trying to investigate the COVID issue. Because of these particular difficulties, the motion occurred and demanding the international or the global public to provide more legitimacy and power for WHO. So that is what I meant by the problem identification, is that there is a difficulty to do whatever in the status quo. That's why we need this motion. Second, in setup, what do you need? You need your stance. You need to you need to say explicitly what your stance is, where you position yourself. What does it mean? It either means you translate it into a mechanism. So we will going to criminalize littering because we believe that littering can be considered as a criminal activity, and the type of criminalization that we will do is this and this and that. Or we will going to provide WHO with more power, meaning that one, we will going to provide WHO with military power, for example, or military support. Number two, we will going to oblige every country to let WHO representative in each of their health ministry, for example, can either be translated in a mechanism, or as simple as we believe that in this in the debate about morality, this is a motion of comparison. The team that will win in this debate is a team who can manage to prove to you which definition or which origin of morality that we're going to create the world to be a better place in a form of more people will actually do better things to other people, or ensuring more contribution. Thirdly, you will going to talk about metric. What will you prove and why it's winning? And vice versa. What should your opponent prove to win in the debate? I will have an example after this of a better speaker, obviously, with better English. So arguments. In general, Prime Minister should have these three arguments. Number one, your main argument that will going to answer the BOP or burden of proof of the motion as directly as possible. If the burden of proof is to prove the efficacy, then you will going to have an efficacy argument. If this is a narrative or value judgment motion, your first argument will talk about the analysis, the principal analysis, why is the certain principle important, most it has to be upheld the most, and etc. Second argument will going to be the good impact of you fulfilling the BOP. Note, good impact can be either practical and or principal argument. So, for example, if you can give more power to WHO. So in the first argument, we will going to talk about how providing this more power to WHO will going to help you solve global pandemic or global health issue generally, and making the job of WHO and all the goal of WHO and generally the global health aims such as what occur in SDG be achieved more effectively. That's your first argument. Your second argument, because the first argument is already very, very practical, right? It's about solving this particular problem and etc. etc. Your second argument will going to be about the good impact of executing that. The good impact when we manage to achieve the global health issue or the SDGs goal more effectively, it resulted in not only a better WHO, but a better global world or the international community and international cooperations all together, because principally there is a principle of transnationalism and also the globalized world. What is transnationalism principle? Transnationalism principle is basically when the border among countries has already been blurred, and this becomes very important for us to ensure that any international organizations can execute their work or their goal as effective as possible, because the world already becomes very transnationalistic and everything has a global supply chain. So it's a good impact, right? But it's a good impact principally. The goal is, but the point is, in the second argument, you explain the direct benefit your first argument will going to provide, whichever form it is. Thirdly, is possible trade-off. Why? You need to come with an awareness that no analysis, no solution is perfect. When you are helping the poor, the rich will going to feel violated. When you giving affirmative action for women, male or any other gender will going to feel violated. So you need to analyze the possible trade-off. But remember, all these three argument structure is not the title. So even if you are providing a trade-off argument, you should not, and I highly suggest you don't title your trade-off argument as a trade-off argument. It's the mindset. It's the mindset of creating a justification to conceding something or letting go of something or possible collateral damage of your proposal. So this is not the title, this structure is not the title, but the mindset you have in each argument as a Prime Minister. Yeah. Structure in arguments. Lah, kenapa kagak geser dah? Coy, bentar. Okay, yeah, they do. Okay, so this is 2022. RL is so obsolete. Like, dude and dudettes. I hear RL ever since I'm in, I don't know, high school or junior high school. It's so outdated. We need something new. So what do you do in your argument? The structure of your arguments. Number one, I want to provide a very good example of setup. Sorry, almost forgot. Kasihkan ngomong. Wait though. And then I will give you example of arguments. Wait, yeah. This is an example of a very, very good setup. This is an old debating video. Probably some of you don't know this individual. You know Bosio more. But Bosio, if you notice, the speech is full of simply narrative, no rigid structure. I mean, I love Bosio, I love it, but it's more of a public speaking speech, not like a debate speech that you can copy. Not to mention, Bosio is just super smart. It's almost impossible for us, the ESL, EFL. I think me myself is ENL, English as no language, so no hablo English. But yeah, go on. This is in this video you will see an example of setup that are super duper extensive. We're just going to listen to the setup. If you guys want to hear more, this is the link of the video. English has no language. Apa sih? Okay, hold on.
Standing here in Fiona in my collective third world's grand final, again from opening government. But this time, I am genuinely proud to support the proposal that we bring before the House. Robert Mugabe has systematically oppressed the people of Zimbabwe for nigh on a decade. Right now, 5 million people, and increasing every day, are living behind the poverty line, not because Zimbabwe is too poor to do anything about it, but because Robert Mugabe's policies have actively destroyed the country. The cholera epidemic that we thought was being fixed is again resurgent and spreading within Zimbabwe, and that there is clear and active lack of respect for the will of the people within Zimbabwe. Attacks on the MDC and Morgan Tsvangirai have resumed, to the point where the leader of the opposition movement for democratic change, Morgan Tsvangirai, has himself called for the African Union and the South African development community to send in armed peacekeepers to restore democratic rule in Zimbabwe. We think this is a brilliant idea. The aim of the government bench is to remove Robert Mugabe from power and restore Zimbabwean democracy.
The speaker name is Victor Finkel. What Victor Finkel was just did, number one, Victor Finkel just explained the urgency, the reason why the motion occurred. The motion occurred because Zimbabwe's citizens has no other reason. They has no other alternative or options. They are in a dire needs. Not only that the citizen is in dire need, moreover, the opposition party and the opposition of the government already is at a wit's end, already creating a mechanism that is not effective to make Robert Mugabe step down of the leadership. Number two, what Victor Finkel is about to say is that he is their stance as the opening government.
We believe the international and in particular the African community has sat on the sidelines for too long. We believe this policy will bring about positive change both for the people in Zimbabwe and for African democracy across the continent. Our model is clear. We think in much the same way that ECOWAS has just issued a threat to Cote d'Ivoire that is backed up with threat of military intervention in a very short period of time, we believe that the South African development community and the African Union should issue Robert Mugabe an ultimatum. You have 1 month.
In mechanism and creating, executing action, you need to not only be clear on what you are about to do, but also who will do it. This house would invade Zimbabwe, opening government, translate the house as the African Union. So it's clear who is executing the order or the action.
To a similarly appropriate time to accept an amnesty in South Africa, beyond which time the SADC and the AU will send in ground and air forces supported by
and who will also be the actors or stakeholders involved. Is it on the African Union? But he also mentioned SADC, mentioning European
technology of the West in the form of the United Nations to bring about an end to his dictatorial rule. We will go in and destroy systematically the hardened military targets with airstrikes, and the thousands of troops in Zimbabwe will stand no mechanism and no real opposition to the combined forces of the SADC, the AU, and the United Nations. We believe this should be followed up with a massive international aid package and the presence of peacekeepers in the nation until free and fair elections can be held and a transition to a stable society can be guaranteed. And we expect this will be long term. We expect peacekeepers will be there for 5 to 10 years, in much the same way as ECOWAS did in Liberia and Sierra Leone successfully. Why do we think it's necessary to act? Because we think that sovereignty is not an absolute, and the government of Robert Mugabe has given up any claim.
The rest of the speech is remarkable. Please do watch it by yourself. I'm already speaking for an hour. Oh my God, why nobody is stopping me? Okay. How is what? Terus gue kayak baru sadar, terus panic. Okay, I'm gonna speed up a bit. Amo yo. Oh, wait. Tan dodol. Wait. Gak apa-apa, Kak. Gue jadi gak enak, gue kaget sendiri gitu kayak, udah sejam. Okay, I'm gonna do this very quickly. So Aral go to drain, go down the drain, already explained. So what do you do in the arguments and each of arguments? This should be the structure. Number one, instead of having the mindset of assertion, you need to say in as concise and as direct manner, what are you going to prove? In my first argument, Viktor Frankl said, in my argument, I'm going to prove to you why this is urgent. Number one, because the concept of sovereignty is already obsolete. Now, the concept of sovereignty is already obsolete. That is what Viktor Frankl trying to prove. Trying to prove what actually is the concept of sovereignty, whether or not concept of sovereignty absolute, always happen or always ensured, or can it be obsolete? Number two, what foundation or should your argument be understood or judged? This is what usually is missing. You go on saying that, okay, my first argument is talking about how our proposal is going to be effective. Our proposal will going to be effective because we solve a problem. We will going to do this, and that. The definition of foundation, or what I meant by foundation here, is that before you are saying that, okay, my proposal will going to be effective to solve that problem, or criminalizing littering will going to effectively change the behavior of people. My argument first will going to talk to you about the analysis of human behavior. What actually is the reason why people litter? People litter not because A, they have no awareness of environmental protections. It's silly, the campaign is already out there, education is out there. Second of all, the littering is also not because they don't, government don't provide sufficient infrastructure for you to throw your litter into the right place. Government providing with you with a public garbage trash, or you can have your own personal bags of trash, for example. Therefore, the main reason why people litter is that there is no direct immediate harm inflicting toward them, in which it causing them to be a selfish individual. What does criminalization do in order to deal with this? That explanation was an explanation of foundation or metric for how your arguments will later going to be understood. So you provide a foundation, you provide a fundamental metric dictating your judge. This is how you need to see my argument at. Number three, step-by-step analysis, obviously, explaining the process. Four, don't forget, you need to also conclude by showing significance. I promise this is the last video. I think after this is the workshop. I have no time. So we'll just see a really good structural example of just one argument. No, I'm not. You'll see it by yourself there. I don't think I have time. Q&A deh, Q&A. Asik kan ngomong. Is there any question? Hello.
How can you make a mechanism that can't be rebut, like a metal box of mechanism that is strong enough and won't have any leaks out of it?
Okay, so here's the thing. Number one, what I want to clarify and making sure to change the mindset at is the goal of you making an argument and speech in general is obviously to win. But it's almost impossible for your arguments, your speech, your mechanism not to be rebutted by your opponent. It literally is their job to rebut you. So that mindset, yeah. But to translate into in answering what actually is a good, how to have a good good mechanism, you need to consider at the very least 3 things. Number 1, you need to consider what actually is a change that you want to achieve with your mechanism. Example being, for example, in the motion, hold on, I know I prepared some motion. Kalau ada di sini. Sabar coy. I'm a multitask, giving an example that require mechanism. Okay. Oh no. Okay, this. For example, under this motion that requires a mechanism, first you need to consider the type of changes you want to achieve by your proposal or by your mechanism or proposal or your policy. The type of change that you want to create from this motion is that you want to hold politicians accountable. So if the type of change, what you want to achieve is to ask accountability from the politicians. So you need to translate this motion. You need to make a mechanism of this motion talking about when will this promises executed to be enforceable, or when will you demand the politician to execute their policy? Meaning, in your mechanism, your first mechanism, you will going to say that we will going to require, or we will going to oblige our politicians to also attach time frame within their political promises. For example, if a politician promises to eradicate poverty, they need to explain how many percentage of poverty that they will going to decrease by what time, and by the time determined by them. For example, they will going to decrease poverty by 3% within 2 years of their position or of being in power. Therefore, after 2 years, if there is no decrease of poverty by 2%, we will going to require the politician to step down. So you need to consider the type of change or the type of delta that you want, translate it. So if the type of change is determined by the time, you need to attach time requirements or time standard within your mechanism. Second of all, after you consider the type of change, and by the way, this is not only one mechanism. For example, if you want, if you need to consider the change not only based on time, you need to also consider it based on number. You also need to consider it based on sector. Say it in a multiple different mechanism, but the main logic you need to consider is what type of change do you expect your proposal will going to bring the result. Second, you need to also consider the who will going to execute it, so that it becomes clear in your house who will going to enforce certain policy, what type of ability will this particular stakeholders or actor has in enforcing the policy. For example, making promises made by politicians in position of power enforceable, obviously this is a position that judicial trial or KY has in Indonesian context, or in the United States, it's the Supreme Court. So you will going to say that in the next mechanism, you will going to say that this will going to be executed by the Supreme Court. This is just an additional power that the Supreme Court has. The main difference right here is that number one, there is more clear and an additional standard of us stepping down president. Because by the way, Supreme Court can step, Supreme Court along with the Parliament can actually Apa namanya? Not who. Itulah ngelengserin presiden. What is English? I already told you. ENL. So second, what you need to consider, who will going to do this. Number 3, obviously you need to consider the fail-safe mechanism. What is a fail-safe mechanism? For example, if if at the end the politicians cannot execute the promises, but it is not because the politicians is evil. So fail-safe means when your goal or the situation is not ideal as you think it is. So these are the 3 mindset you need to consider in making mechanism. The type of change you want to achieve, who will going to execute it, with what type of power, what type of function, and thirdly, fail-safe mechanism if the situation is not as ideal as you thought it will be. Second question, ya Allah panjang-panjang amat sih pertanyaan. Minum dah. How to push is easy by saying it. The hardest thing is to identify the ideal and most important metric in the debate. Number 1, burden of proof. Obviously, you understand the motions, you understand the burden of proof. Number 2, you understand where do you want to win. Number 3, you understand what your argument is doing. Example being, wait. The video that I didn't play, then I play. She will do it better than me. Some of you already hear this, but I'm a big fan of this Prime Minister speech, one of the best Prime Minister speech I've ever heard. Minum dulu, makasih udah ngetin, udah tahu ya. So this is the motion. Notice in this somewhat abstract motion, usually it becomes hard to, make sure. I know Eva Quinones, my babe. In that debate, she was brilliant, really, really good. I'd like to use it as an example. I will going to display to you how Quinones understanding in terms of burden coming from the motion, how Quinones provide one of the structurally flawless and smooth argument in Prime Minister. Pada yang ngomong, mending yang dikit yang ngomong, sian kalian kalau dengerin gue.
A moral obligation. I think that utilitarianism is the effects of expression of the harm of having children. And this is only a debate about the morality. On our side, we say it is immoral. On side opposition, they say it is either morally neutral or positive. We can beat them in either world. 3 points of substantive I'm going to bring to you today. First, what makes something a moral obligation? Second, as to how children cannot consent into being born. And third, as to how you are consigning children to a life of misery. First, what makes something a moral obligation? I think that utilitarianism is the best principle in this scenario. The way that we come to ontological principles, like you should not lie, is typically by utilitarian framing. That is, it is better to live in a world where everyone does not lie, or at least tries not to. So similarly, it is better on balance not to have children. Therefore, we believe that the utilitarian principle is the correct metric by which to evaluate the moral framing in this debate. But I also think that opposition has a uniquely difficult barrier to overcome here, which is the fact that this says biological children, right?
So that's how you push it. You say it explicitly, but identifying. So this is the motion about morality, a definition of morality. Eva realized that defining morality usually using their epistemology or the ontological definition. Therefore, she knows that if under the definition of ontological or epistemological, or the very basic definition of having biological children, it's almost impossible for you to argue that, no, you cannot be pregnant, because being pregnant or not, it's an individual right. Yes, it's the woman's individual right to do so. That's why she identified the way I can win in this discussion if I use other philosophical basis, which is instead of the ontological and or the epistemological definition, she used the utilitarian principle, which is how you measure or you determine the value of something based on the impact or based on the net benefit it provided. So that's how you identify. You identify from the burden of proof. You identify the metric from how and where would you want to win in the debate. Next question. Itu baru satu doang loh. Oke. Ya, Allah nambah. Ntar. How to integrate characterization into argument, and does it also a part of foundation? Yes, characterization can either be a part of the foundation. For example, this house would criminalize littering tadi. I use characterizations of people's behavior as the foundation. But characterization can also be utilized in a step-by-step process analysis. In a step-by-step process analysis, you explain and you create predictions of how a certain actor will going to do what, or creating a scenario analysis based on different characterization of people, moderate, liberal, vis-a-vis the conservative in a step-by-step analysis. So how to integrate characterization into arguments? Yes, it can be part of a foundation, but how to integrate it into your argument, it depends on what are you trying to prove. For example, if your argument is an efficacy argument, obviously you need characterization as part of a step-by-step analysis, because in efficacy argument, in trying to prove that a certain policy or certain action will going to be effective, you need to predict how will society A accept, B react, and then manifest or project or the actions that they will do as a result on that. So that's how you are integrating characterization into your argument. Characterizations often and usually is used to analyze and predict people reaction over certain policy or action. Second, characterization can also be utilized in justifying or explaining principle. In feminist motion, wait, let me find feminist motion examples. Aduh, itu kompetisi apa ya? Bayangan kompetisi sis tur, Lupita Nyong. Oh, cute. Okay, hold on. I'll find the motion. Sorry, I'm like. For example, in this motion, you are as the feminist movement. Udah jam 8. Sorry. Oh, lastly. Ini characterization ya. Kasihan ngegantung. Bentar ya. Satu aja. Gue merasa bersalah. Okay, this is to answer characterization as a principle basis. In this motion, this house believes that the feminist movement should actively advocate for open relationship. The unit to characterize the member of feminist movement in order to principally justify this is the right things to do for feminist movement because it accommodates the interest of its member. So sorry for the other question. I took my sweet time. Dari Tendama committee. I hope it helped, or I hope when you go back into the video, you find the answer somewhere, somehow. So thank you. I'm sorry once again.
All right, guys, thank you so much for the excitement. And yeah, I see that the participant is very enjoying the webinar session, and there's a lot of questions. But yeah, unfortunately, it's already been 8 p.m. and this is the end of the webinar for the first day. But we will have a quick photo session if you don't mind to turn on your camera.
Okay, guys, you can open your camera and we'll start the photo session. Okay, I will start from the first slide. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, cheese.
I'm gone.
Okay, second slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a nice night. Thank you, Kak Astri.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So before the end session, we also have announcement of our next event. Yeah, we want to announce again our Sanata Dharma debate open. All right. So we will have Sanata Dharma debate open that will be held online for 2 days using British parliamentary format debate with 40 team cap, including novice category with education core with our beloved Kak Astri and also Kak Kusyai. And it's also open debate competition. So we allow the composite institution for varsity and high school students. And if you are interested in this debate competition, you can directly contact me. But before I close the first day of this event, I would like to thank you and give the appreciation to the most notable speakers, Kak Astri, that have shared their knowledge to us today. And I would like to remind you guys to join the next webinar session tomorrow because there will be more exciting and precious knowledge from our speakers. So if you would like to gain more, don't forget to join again and get treasure to enhance your debating.